welcome. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah. I am one of the Rabbinic Fellows at B'nai Jeshurun, and I'm a rabbinical student at JTS, and I'm so excited to be with you today. As I'm sure has been mentioned in other sessions, the sort of broad overarching theme for the day of learning today is environmentalism, nature, God's creations. And when I think of Jewish environmentalism, the sort of primary value that's often cited in relation to some sort of ethic around environmentalism from the Torah is what's called Bal Taschit. So we're going to look at the sort of most simplest idea of what Bal Taschit is, and then we're going to look at something totally different and seemingly unrelated, which is the prohibition against shaving different parts of a man's facial hair, which is introduced in the Torah and is talked about in the sources with the same language, the language of Bal Taschit. So we're going to take sort of a deeper dive into the sources around the prohibitions with the beard, and we're going to see if there are any connections that we draw and what we can extract from the ethos and ethics behind the beard prohibitions, and if we can bring any of those to our understanding about the environment. So that's where we're headed. So the first few sources are just kind of introducing us to the psukim, to the verses in the Torah that talk about these ideas. So this is the original source, and I bolded in the English and the Hebrew, "You must not destroy, lo tashchit." This is where most of the ideas around our imperative to preserve the environment all link back to this verse. And as we can see in the Rambam, this is just one example of a later halachic source that defines that when we talk about lo tashchit, we're not just talking about trees. So the verse in the Torah, as we heard, is saying when you are in warfare and you are capturing another territory, you're not allowed to cut down the trees or to take fruit from the trees unless you know that the fruits are already, the trees are no longer productive. So there's some sort of preservation of trees, but the sources take this idea a lot further. So the Rambam, Maimonides from the 12th century, spells out for us very clearly, this prohibition does not apply to trees alone. Rather, anyone who breaks utensils, tears garments, destroys buildings, stops up a spring, or ruins food with a destructive intent transgresses the command below tashchit, do not destroy. And so this is the understanding that we come to now, that things like keeping the lights on longer than you're supposed to, in a lot of Jewish spaces, there'll be a tag around the light switch that said, turn the lights off, lo tashchit. And so it's really understood very expansively to mean don't be wasteful, don't take advantage of our natural resources, don't destroy in the most general sense. So that's one Bal Taschit, and that's the one that we're going to attempt to understand, but we're going to do that by sort of leaving it over here for a while. We're going to now venture to the other sources for a while, and at the very end we'll come back to the trees. So the verse from Leviticus chapter 19, verse 27, "You shall not round the corners of your heads, neither shall you destroy the corners of your beard." And again, bolded is the same language, neither shall you destroy, velo tashchit. And these are the only two times in the Torah that we have this phrase, that we have the verb tashchit, and that we in particular have the command lo tashchit. So regardless of the fact that these two things may look totally different, I think that it's incumbent upon us to look and see if there's any connection that we can find between these two ideas. So the tree idea we sort of went into. The beard idea, this is the source for all sorts of restrictions around facial hair. So the first half of the verse, lo takif, do not round the corners of your heads, is used, that's why, and this is understood to apply to men. That's why men don't shave here. So when you see the curls, that's coming from the first part of the verse. And not shaving the corners of the beard is understood to mean that they pick 5 corners of the beard, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and those ones you don't shave with a clean razor. So it's later minimized, you don't shave it with a clean razor. So now that we have kind of those sources laid out for us, we're going to go much deeper into some of the sources around Bal Taschit as it applies to shaving the beard. And we're going to do that. We're going to look at it under three different paradigms, three different hints that we get in the sources as to why this command to not shave parts of the beard might exist. And then at the end, we'll see what we can extract from that and apply it to trees, to environmentalism. So as I said, we're going to look at three different paradigms for why we don't shave the beard. The first one is that leaving beards unshaved is a way of preventing idol worship. So Rabbi Kaplan writes, the pasuk which teaches the mitzvot of Bal Taschit, leaving one's peyot, so that was the first half of the verse, and Bal Taschit, not shaving the corners of the beard, deals with maintaining our cultural identity. When we deal with non-Jewish society, we have to remember that we are a separate entity. As the Torah states, behold, it is a nation that dwells alone, and among the nations it will not be counted. Midrash Hagadol interprets this as meaning that the Jews must always be a distinct group and never assimilate among the nations. It is of the utmost importance to uphold our identity and thereby our faith. As Ibn Ezra notes, the mitzvot of Bal Taschit and Bal Taschit affect a physical mark of our distinction, serving as a reminder of who we are and of our mission in this world. So we're not quite at the idol worship yet. That's coming in the second half. But laying the foundation for that is the idea that we don't shave our beards so that we have a physical marker of our distinctiveness from the other nations, that it's something that marks us as distinctively Jewish in a very visible way for outsiders to see. So it might be about what that cultivates within us, but this source really, the sources that he brings seem to indicate that it's much more an outward appearance of how others see us, and do we appear distinctively Jewish through our appearance, in this case through our beards. So Sefer HaChinuch, which is a source from the 13th century that takes all the mitzvot from the Torah and gives explanations for them, rationales, when talking about this mitzvah of not shaving the corners of our beard, writes that the reason that this mitzvah is affected is, there's sheets here, in order to distance them from us and to erase from amongst ourselves and from our actions any trace of idol worship and its associated activities. This warning comes to make this explicit by manifesting itself on people's bodies, because this is a permanent reminder of sin. So here we get the connection between this distinctiveness and idol worship. That the reason why Jews have to be distinct and have to have this marker of distinction is so that we don't slip into the practices of the other nations that we're distancing ourselves from, most especially so that we don't sort of slip mistakenly into idol worship. And once again, we see in Sefer HaChinuch a similar idea that Ariel Kaplan brought from Ibn Ezra, that we put this reminder on our bodies as an external symbol of these internal values that we're holding. So our internal value is we don't worship idols, we're monotheistic, we're different from others, and we make that manifest through this physical marker on our bodies, and that this physical marker in particular is actually serving to prevent us from doing something bad, in this case, avodah zarah, so idol worship. Putting that paradigm aside, we'll now move to another set of explanations given for the mitzvah. So first paradigm, idolatry, preventing us from idolatry, maintaining us as distinct. It might hold some water, there might be some holes in it. So the next paradigm, I only brought one source, but this is everywhere in the halachic literature, this idea. So this particular source is from Rabbeinu Bachya from the 13th century, and he wrote, the simple reason for the prohibition is to not nullify the symbol that the Holy One used to record sex in order to distinguish the male from the female. So the reason why men are prohibited from shaving their beards is because beards are a distinctively male marker, and the reason why men were given beards was to distinguish between men and women, in this idea that men and women are supposed to be visibly distinct from one another, which we see in other places of the Torah, and so this is just one more addition to that. So we've looked at the idea that we keep our beards to have Jews be distinct and maybe to prevent us from going down the slippery slope toward idol worship. We have the paradigm that beards are, again, a distinctive marker, but this time between men and women. The third paradigm is coming at it from a different angle, and it's saying that the reason why men are prohibited from altering their face is because we want to preserve creation in the way that it was intended. So Sforno, who's a 16th century commentator on the Torah, commenting on the verse in Leviticus that brought us lo takif and lo tashchit, writes, "The only improvement to our God-given bodies we are able to make is the sign of the covenant, i.e. the removal of the male foreskin." And this comment is a little bit taking into context the pasuk about not shaving, because it comes right before the pasuk that we're not allowed to imprint things, like you're not allowed to imprint ink into your body. And so I think sort of taking these collectively, Sforno's noting that maybe the reason why we're not supposed to shave our beards, like Ben alluded to earlier, is that these are how bodies are made. And it's not so much about the beard in particular. It's not about the beard as a male feature or the beard as a Jewish feature. It's just about taking our bodies the way that they are, and sort of maybe more broadly, and we'll get to this, accepting the world that we see it as it was meant to be or as it was created. Just kind of a funny text that I thought underscores this point is from the Bavli, from the Talmud, in Masechet Shabbat, that there's an idea that the glory of a face is its beard, hadrat panim zaken. And I think that the reason why these texts work well together is it's saying by not shaving our beards, not only are we preserving our bodies the way we are, but we're preserving actually a beautifying element of our bodies, that we're protecting something that is important and that is meant to be looked at, that's a glorifying part of the male face. So these two together, we're preserving God's creation like for the sake of maintaining something beautiful. So sort of finishing up the idea that the third paradigm of preserving God's creation, we have this text from the Rambam, from Maimonides' Guide to the Perplexed. Regarding the commandment of Leviticus 19:27, do not destroy the corners of your beard. Okay, that's just orienting us. Let us examine the reasoning, which is the most simple one, which is that there was an idea in their days that hewing the beard was a symbol of wrecking of one's visage because of mourning and slavery. And the Torah desired to uplift the spirit of the nation of Israel in their exodus from slavery to freedom. So it forbade them from anything that destroyed the glory of the face. Like Deuteronomy 14:1, do not cut yourself and do not make any baldness for the dead, and so on. You are children to God, to the Lord your God, the sages commented, and therefore it is appropriate for you to be pleasant and you should not be cut. So there are a lot of ideas kind of wrapped into here, some of which have been picked out by people before. The idea, the connection between a beard and mourning, which is actually interesting because now we have almost an opposite association between a beard and mourning, that you're not supposed to shave in the period of mourning, which now for a lot of people that don't have these grown beards actually means that mourning is a period in which one's facial hair is more grown out. But in this idea, that a cut beard was a symbol of mourning and a symbol of slavery, and that by letting men's beards grow out, we are embodying in a very physical way the ideals of freedom and of life and of all of the things that we aspire to. So I put this under the rubric of preserving God's creation, even though it probably in many ways could be its own number of paradigms, because I think that one of the things this is getting at is that there's something godly, there's something divine about life and about freedom and about all these things that that shaving one's beard brings us away from. And so by keeping beards grown out, we're maintaining those positive elements of our lives, of our experience with God, that there's something godly in that. Okay, so in a moment, we're going to transition back to trees. So I'm just going to read this last source. So this is the Sefer HaChinuch, that same source that gives rationales for all of the mitzvot. Now we're looking at what the rationale is for the lo tashchit from the tree perspective. And what I think that we see in here, what I saw in here, is many of the ideas that we've already pulled out. And I think that we can see many of the same ethics and rationales that we saw in these earlier sources about the beards in this source about the trees as well. So I'll read it, and we'll see if other people feel the same way. The root of this commandment, the Lo Taschit, do not destroy the trees, is known. It is in order to teach our souls to love good and purpose and to cling to it. And through this, good clings to us, and we will distance ourselves from all bad and destructive things. And this is the way of the pious and people of proper action. They love peace and are happy for the good of the creatures and bring them close to Torah, and they do not destroy even a grain of mustard in the world. And they are distressed by all loss and destruction that they see, and if they can prevent it, they will prevent any destruction with all of their strength. And this is indicative of the way in which our sages forbid all manners of destruction, as a means of preventing idol worship, which is a manifestation of our evil impulse. Today, that impulse, this evil impulse of ours, might tell you to do one thing, but if you believe it, tomorrow it will tell you to worship idols. So sort of best to distance ourselves from it altogether. So looking at this, I think some are sort of more apparent than others, but do we see any of the ideas from the first section at play here as well? Not destroying any part of anything, yeah? Idol worship, right, that's the most obvious one. Right, the whole second part of the paragraph, preventing us from idol worship, so not doing something that might lead us in a bad direction. And I think the might is really drawn out here. It's not saying that all of our evil impulses will necessarily lead us to idol worship or something bad, but it's possible that today we'll understand them one way and tomorrow another way, so best to kind of build a fence around them altogether. So that's connecting the idol worship here to trees in particular, that there were maybe contemporary communities that actually were worshiping trees. So it's saying like, yeah, I know that we're telling you not to destroy the trees, but don't mistake that for us thinking that the trees are godly. That's an interesting read. Okay, we'll wrap up in 1 minute, but I think that, so the more obvious ones that I see here are preserving God's creation, which we spoke about, preventing idol worship, which we spoke about. I also think that there are two other ideas in here. One is in the phrase, this is the way of the pious and people of proper action, that there's something there about we as Jews or we as righteous people don't do this thing that is completely inhumane is a bad word here, but is completely inhumane, right? We would never destroy these innocent trees because we are sort of following the righteous way, and that there is, I think, some implication there of Jewish distinctiveness in a way that we saw with the beards, but in a different way. And I think kind of underlying this, and this was from the earlier idea as well, that we are leaving a physical reminder of our ideals. That in the way with the beard that we talked about, it's a sign on our bodies, it's an external symbol of our internal values, that seems to be at play with the trees as well. That when other people look at this field and see the trees are remained intact, they see this physical reminder of our ideals about distinctiveness, about God's creation, about any of the other number of things that we've mentioned. Right. Restraining our emotions, restraining our impulses, we see here too. So I think the last point that I wanted to leave us with is that, right, on the one hand, these feel like totally unrelated things. I think in some ways we looked at how they might be connected, and I actually, when looking through these sources, found that there were many more connections than I had originally thought of. And when I was reflecting on why that might be, I think that, and you can push back if you think this is pushing too far, but I think that there is something to this connection that's saying that Lo Taschit in the environmental sense can be really vague or really big, really vast, right? We saw in the Rambam, it means don't destroy anything. It means keep the environment as it's supposed to be, and it can sort of be hard to wrap our heads around what we actually are supposed to be doing or not doing when we think, when I think today about right, like I'm panicked about climate change, but I have no idea what I should do. And the things that I feel like I'm doing are a little bit haphazard, and who knows if they're actually the most effective. And that one of the things I take from this is that rather than try to think about how we're going to preserve all of the trees or like every land that we come across, let's start with like I can start with myself, right? And I can start with my own practices in terms of my own body. I don't have a beard, but right, like the one can start with one's own practices regarding one's own bodies and thinking about the values that that cultivates, what that shows to other people, and that starting from there, starting from each individual person, that's how we'll sort of build toward this grandiose ethic of environmentalism in general. So that was my takeaway from this. If anyone else has other comments, you can feel free to come up and share them. Otherwise, thank you so much.